Welcome again to the old principal. I am the old principal, 我就是老校长. And we've come to another interesting lesson. There'll be a lot of new words here, so you'll have to pay a lot of attention. This will be lesson number 21. Lesson number 21, 600 degrees hot. OK, 这个热度600度啊 OK, very hot. I'm going to tell part of my story. But before we begin, we'll ask my wife, as we often do, to read the story, and then I'll be right back.
Number 21, 600 degrees hot. I found a good way to improve my grades. Every year in high school and university, I worked part-time to pay for part of my education. On the surface, it doesn't make sense. But educators say that when people work part-time, they use their study time more wisely. There is less study time, but more is learned. My second year in university, I worked for a printing company, but I was not a printer. I was the printer's devil. A devil is somebody or something that is very bad, but in the printing world, a printer's devil is an apprentice printer. In my case, I was the janitor, and I also cleaned the ink off of the printing presses every evening, but I also did other things too. 45 years ago, we didn't use computers or word processors. We had to melt and reuse metal to make printing type. Every week I had to melt the metal down. I had a very hot stove. When the metal reached more than 600 degrees, it started to melt. During the winter, the job was fine, but during the hot summer days, I felt like I was working in hell, or at least a very hot place. When the metal was completely melted, then I had to begin stirring it. Stirring molten metal at 600 plus degrees is a very tiring job. The harder I stirred, the more dross and bad things came up to the surface. Then I had to reach into the stove and skim off the dross. I would stir it many times until it appeared that all the dross was removed. How did I know that I was finished stirring? When the surface of the molten metal looked like a shiny mirror, then I knew I was finished with this step. Then I put the molds down on the floor below the stove and turned on the faucet. Out came the very hot and shiny liquid metal.
Welcome back. Are you ready to go? I found a good way to improve my grades. Oh, you want a secret on how to improve your grades? Whoa, here it is. A good way to improve my grades. 把我的成绩提高 improve the grades going on. I found every year in high school and university, I worked part-time to pay for part of my education. Okay, in high school, 中学, and in university, I worked part-time, 我是办公工作的啊, to pay for my education, 付我的, well, it says 教育. I should have written down educational expenses, or you could just say tuition, 学费. So, when I work, because I always went to private schools. I went to private schools. So, 私立班的, and private schools tend to be more expensive. So I worked part-time. We say, maybe a way of saying that is 半工半读, okay? That's a possible translation. Except for I was a full-time student. So it was quite, my schedule was quite busy going on. On the surface, it doesn't make sense. Okay, remember, what we're talking about is my way of improving my grades. 表面上, on the surface. It doesn't make sense. When we say it doesn't make sense, in this case, it's 不合逻辑. It doesn't make sense. Okay? It doesn't make sense. 不合逻辑. Because if you're working, then you're not studying. If you're studying, you're not working. So if you are studying and you're working and you're doing both of them at the same time, then your grades should go down. But mine went up. So why? Why? Going on? But educators, 教育家, they say that when people work part-time, when they're going to school, of course, they use their study time more wisely. 比较会善用他们读书的时间啊. Okay? So, well, I mean, let's face the facts. There was one year that I worked very, very, very hard. And my grades were very, very, very high. 我的成绩好得不得了. So, why? It doesn't make sense. But it works. It works. Going on. There is less study time, but more is learned. 学习的时间少，但是这个内容得的内容背的课就多。This is the way it works. Going on. My second year in university, I worked for a printing company. 印刷工厂. So I'm a student, but I work part-time for this printing company, 印刷工厂. But I was not a printer. 印刷工啊. I was the printer's devil. I say, excuse me, I think I understand that. You weren't a printer, but you were the printer's devil. And then you think of all the English you've ever studied and you say, devil, 鬼, 魔鬼. You, that's me, were a printer's devil? Now I explain. Going on. A devil is somebody or something very bad. 当然, 鬼是非常不好, 非常不好. Okay? But in the printing world, 印刷世界, 印刷业, in the printing world, a printer's devil is an apprentice printer. A printer's devil is an apprentice printer. So, printer's devil, that was me. How are we going to translate that? Maybe we should translate it 印刷小鬼. Yeah, okay, maybe we can do it that way. Is an apprentice printer. What does apprentice mean? Apprentice means 学徒, or somebody who is beginning to learn. So an apprentice printer is somebody, 学徒, somebody who is learning how to print, to be a printer, okay? In my case, okay, 我的情况是这样, I was the janitor. 我是清洁工啊, janitor. Okay? I also cleaned off the ink off of the printing presses every evening. Every night after work, okay, every night after work, I also cleaned the ink off of the printing presses. So they used ink, okay, 油墨, okay, and when they finished printing 印刷完毕, and they're finished for the day, what happens? They stop the machine. But the ink maybe will dry, 会在这个机器里面干掉. That would not be good. So every evening I had to 洗一洗这个印刷机，洗掉那个油墨. Okay, I did that every night. I did that basically six nights a week. 6 nights a week, because they even worked on Sunday. So, but I also did other things. 我也是做一些其他的事情 going on. 45 years ago, we didn't use computers or word processors. You know what a computer is? In fact, 45 years ago, 根本没有电脑. Now, I must say that for all of you young people, you say, well, everybody knows about computers and smartphones and all of these things. But in those days, no, 连这个手机啊, this mobile telephone, we didn't have any of that. This is a long time ago. 45 years ago, we didn't use computers and word processors. A word processor is 一种软件，是一个电脑可以打字的啊。That's a word processor, 处理字的这个软件. Okay, nowadays we have that, you know, but back then we didn't. In fact, we had what? Typing. And so you would learn to 用大字机啊, and they were big and clunky and ugly and awful, and we had to learn to type. In fact, I tell a story about me learning to type in typing class, 打字. But I will tell that story later on. Now, 45 years ago, we didn't have computers or word processors, so we had to melt and reuse the metal to make printing type. Okay, they used, let me make sure I got this down. Right, printing type is this little, well, actually it's very, very small. It's just a little piece of metal, and it has, on the top part of it has A, B, C. 这个活字, and some people say 签字. I don't know. But anyway, it's made out of a type of lead. 是铅做的. And so we had to melt and reuse the metal. Okay, 我们那些这个金属 我们必须溶解，重新再用 ，okay, So we had to use it again and again and again. 用完了要溶解 okay? And then reuse, 重新用它 to make this printing type, okay, that we printed with. In fact, if you saw that picture at the beginning, that was some of this printing type going on. Every week, I had to melt the metal down. Okay, so every week I had to melt the metal down. So you had a lot of this metal, 这个金属，铅是铅的，是lead, L-E-A-D, lead, and I had to take it and melt it down. 我要把它放在一个 I would say 一种烤箱 and it got very hot. And 慢慢就开始溶解. I melt it down. Okay, it is a very hot stove. 非常非常热的这个炉子it used gas. 这个是用瓦器自然气烧的. When the metal reached more than 600 degrees, 当那个金属到600度, okay, this is 600度, then what? It started to melt. Melt, 溶解, okay? So when it reached 600 degrees, it started to melt. Now that's the nature of the work going on. During the winter, the job was fine. Of course. 冬天的时候, why? Because what do you know about winter? 而且我们是西北方, so we are up in the northwest. It's cold during the winter. So this is a hot job. 600 degrees, and you are standing there beside the hot stove, and its fire is on, and it's so hot. During the winter, 相当好, fine, 好啊, okay? But during the hot summers, I felt like I was working in hell. 我感觉到好像我在地狱工作. Oh, it was so hot. Well, if it wasn't hell, 如果不是地狱, at least it was a very hot place. And you're drinking water. All the time you're drinking water. It's a very hot place there. Melting down the metal, 那个金属要溶解它了. When the metal was completely melted, then I had to begin stirring it. So I'm going to stir it, okay? You know what? To 搅拌. So you're going to stir the metal. Of course, if you're going to stir it, you've got to open it up and you've got to look at it, and then you put the lid on and you stir. Why do you stir the metal? Well, there's a reason why. Because this metal is not pure. 不是纯的. There are many other impurities in it. These impurities are not good. So we need to get them out. Completely melted, then I began to stir it, going on. Stirring molten metal at 600 plus degrees, 600 多, 600多度, okay, is a very tiring job. Hey, I was young. I had lots of energy. In those days, it was still a very hard, hot job. Going on. The harder I stirred, the more dross and bad things came up to the surface. Okay, 渣 ，OK， 这个浮渣就升上来。See, I stirred it, and these bad things, they came up, 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 up to the surface, 到表面上，然后漂流在上面。Okay, so all these bad things, the dross, okay, the 浮杂这些东西, all these impurities, they come up to the surface. Then I had to reach down into the stove and skim off the dross. Okay, so the dross, this is the bad stuff. This is on top. Okay, and then I had to reach down into the stove. How hot is it? Yeah, very hot. And I had to skim off the dross. Okay, all of this dross, 就是浮杂还有脏的东西都漂流在上面, right? So then I had to skim it off. Skim it off means that I had to just take the very top layer, skim it off. 就是最高的这一层啊，就是要拿掉 to skim it off. Okay, skim, good word. That means just to take the very 最高的这一层啊，要拿掉. That's what skim means. It must be a good way of saying it, but that's what it means in English. Going on. I would stir many times, okay? After I got everything off, I say, oh, good, I'm done. No. So then I have to start stirring again. And I go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And I'm stirring this thing back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And then I'd have to take I had a very long spoon. 一个好长好长的一个调羹啊. I mean, it was a real long spoon. And then I'd have to skim off that surface, all this impure, 这个脏物, I would take that off and I'd throw it away. Okay. And so I would stir it many times until it appeared that all the dross, all this bad stuff was removed. 已经完全拿掉. Going on. How did I know that I was finished stirring? So I had to do this stirring many times. How did I know when I was finished? 我怎么知道已经完成我该做的, at least the stirring part, finish up the stirring part. Well, here's how you know. Going on. When the surface of the molten metal, okay, molten metal, 那就是那个melted 溶解的金属, okay, looks like a 闪亮的金子. It looks like a shiny mirror. Then I knew I was finished with this step. 这个步骤已经做完了. Okay, so that's how you know. Molten metal, melted metal. 这个溶解的金属. It looked like a shiny mirror, 金子. Okay, and then I knew I was finished with this step. Going on. Then I put some molds down on the floor below the stove and turned on the faucet, and out came the very hot and shiny liquid metal. I put the molds down on the floor. What is a mold? 模板, 模板. So you're going to put the metal down in there. So I put it down on the floor. You can't hold it. Why? It's 600 degrees. In fact, you have to be very careful that that molten metal doesn't get on you. If it gets on your shoe, it'll burn your shoe. If it gets on your clothes, it'll burn a hole. 会烧一个洞. So very dangerous. Then I put the molds down on the floor below the stove. So just down on the floor. And I put all these molds down there. And then I turned on the faucet. 我就开了这个龙头. Okay, faucet, 这个龙头. If you say a water faucet, it's 水龙头, okay? And out came the very hot. Of course, how hot? 600 degrees hot. Out came this very hot but shiny, 闪亮的 liquid metal, 液体的金属. Okay, liquid metal. Whoa! We just had enough time to finish this lesson. Now, all I have left to do is to tell you, you can write a letter to me. Our email address is theoldprinciple@gmail.com. And you can see many of these stories, eventually all of these stories, on our website, www.theoldprinciple.org. Hey, it's been great to spend this time with you, and I hope that you will come back next time for another interesting lesson. Until then, bye-bye.